Today in the EU, Hungary's plan to make Europe great again begins.
So we do not belong to the mainstream European approach.
I don't know what is the personal reason for the Dutch Prime Minister to hate me.
So there is no reason to negotiate membership of Ukraine now.
In less than a week, Hungary will take over the presidency of the European Council, one of the most important brokering positions at the European level. Many hoped this role would bring Hungary closer to EU values, but that seems unlikely now. In what direction is Hungary planning to stir the EU? Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Giada Santana, and this is Today in the EU. I'm joined in the studio by Aurelie Pugnet to discuss the history of bad blood between Orbán and the EU and what vision Hungary has for the Union. Hi, Aurelie.
Hi.
The moment many member states dreaded has arrived as Hungary takes on the Council presidency. However, this transition faced significant resistance, with several MEPs questioning Budapest's ability to hold the Council's presidency.
So I really ask you, please suspend the Hungarian presidency of the Council, trigger the Article 7 procedure to take away Orbán's veto, and also prepare the treaty change vote so we can get away from you.
What is at the root of these concerns?
The Council presidency is a very important moment for each member of the European Union because this is the time when they can shape negotiations and they can shape the laws and everything that is happening in Brussels, or almost everything. And when we saw over the past few years how controversial Prime Minister Viktor Orbán was, so the leader of Hungary for the past few years, and a lot of issues that there were between him and his questioning of the Commission president, of how he and his country were treated, he would say, based on how they would handle rule of law issues and independence of media, for example. So there has been a lot of questions surrounding his values, you can say, and the way he was running the country. So that has brought a lot of concerns, especially from members of the European Parliament, in saying that maybe he's not fit, him and his ministers and his government and all of his civil servants and diplomats are not fit to hold a presidency because they won't be able to uphold the values of the EU and actually do a good job.
Take away his voting rights, keep EU funding frozen, and cancel the Council presidency.
And how did MEPs actively try to keep Hungary out of the presidency?
Indeed, so there has been a few procedures, especially from the members of the European Parliament, who said, well, we are going to try and make sure that you don't get the presidency because you can't uphold the values, rule of law, and basically just democracy. On the side of the member states, there hasn't been very vocal comments or criticism from his colleagues. But what we have seen is that back in January, there were a lot of concerns as to what could happen if Hungary would take over also the chairing of leaders, actually, because at the time, the current chairman, the current president, Charles Michel, he announced that he was running for a seat in the European Parliament and therefore that he would quit his position a bit earlier, therefore in around June or July, which would coincide with the start of the Hungarian presidency. And so the Hungarians would have been in charge of also crafting compromises between the leaders. And that a lot of diplomats at that time, a lot of politicians expressed concern in saying, well, can we really leave that person who was criticizing so much for its handling of democracy actually handle compromise and negotiations between leaders?
Now, this is not going to happen, but there are other ways in which Hungary could affect the workflow of the Council. Exactly what is the role of the holder of the rotating presidency?
So the role of the presidency is pretty much to craft compromises between the 26 other members around the table. So technically, Hungary is chairing the meeting, doesn't necessarily have a say in it, but its job is on most topics and files within the EU to make sure that everyone agrees, propose compromises, and basically come up to a final decision, either to be voted at with a majority or unanimity. So there was worry that Hungary would propose compromises that they thought were the best and that they thought was the only option, and therefore not necessarily taking into account the other 26. Because Hungary has been seen in having specific positions that are completely differentiated from the other 26 or maybe 24, 20-something. So that was definitely a concern. That said, when Hungary had such strong position and such different positions than the rest, that was on foreign policy matters and on defense matters, especially related to Ukraine. So
yes, exactly. We have witnessed in the past Budapest's stubborn obstruction on Ukraine joining the EU, receiving military aid, and also on the theme of sanctions against Russia. How could the Council affect how these issues are considered?
It can affect it in a way that Hungary has obviously had a strong voice and has blamed Brussels, as they say, or the EU or the other colleagues in taking decisions that go against Budapest, even though they actually had voted in favor. So I think we can definitely expect a game of blaming. So Budapest, even though they're part of the decision, will blame Brussels even more. Maybe they will pretend that they are sidelined or left in the corridor again and not be part of the discussion. That said, most of the decisions on which Hungary has been, let's call it an issue, or has made it very clear that they disagreed or has tried to change the process of the decision, like, for example, like you said, military aid, maybe also opening of negotiations of accession with Moldova or Ukraine. On these issues, Hungary is not actually in charge of crafting the compromises. It can help. It can maybe delay a little bit of process, but it's not actually the one in charge because the people in charge of that are actually the people in the Commission.
One way we can make sense of what is to come is looking back especially at the Belgian presidency. What are the key takeaways we should keep in mind?
The Belgian presidency has been seen as the last presidency before chaos. So they sped up a lot of the files to finish a lot of them, that especially those that they would say are most controversial, because they were worried that what if they come into the hands of the Hungarians, who knows what can happen, really. So there has definitely been a lot of this. There has also been, from their side, maybe of a push, like I said, on the negotiations of accession with Moldova and Ukraine, foreign policy a little bit, also on defense matters, but in the end, it's not where they crafted compromises. What I think is interesting to notice is how they've managed to finish a lot of the Green Deal's files, Green Deal being such a huge flagship project for the European Union to make it more climate friendly, basically. And the Belgian actually finished almost all of the files on this, especially this week, the nature restoration law vote.
The slogan of this presidency is what many have defined as a remake of Trump's motto for the 2016 elections, Make Europe Great Again. How does Hungary plan to do that?
It's a great plan, isn't it? Make Europe great again. For the Hungarians, it comes through different strands. What's interesting about the Hungarians, I would say, coming from the perspective of a journalist, is how much they believe in European sovereignty. They're very much like the French in that sense. They are very much looking towards ourselves and how can we be more sovereign and maybe more dependent towards this and that partner, but actually the way they bill it is that it will help at the end of the day the economy. So you can see that in their competitiveness program, in their economic program, there are references to this, to labor shortage, to the issue of demography. Europe has actually a population that is in decline in terms of numbers. It is an issue for the Hungarians. They have a lot of young people leaving their country to go find a job elsewhere, looking for a better life elsewhere. So you'll definitely see a lot of those issues. On defense matters as well, they have said that they want to move forward on the negotiating of the long-term industrial programs to boost the production of arms and weapons on the continent. Again, this is very much sovereignty and make Europe great again oriented. What it will say in terms of relationship with Africa and migration will definitely be interesting to follow because they have quite a hawkish stance when it comes to migration. And then same with the relationship that they will have with China, the US, if Trump is back again, and Russia. That is for us to see. It's going to be interesting to have such presidency.
Indeed, a lot to look out for. Hungary previously held the EU presidency in 2011, the year after Orbán returned to power. However, ever since, Hungary has faced a lot of backlash, several infringement proceedings launched by the European Commission. Do you think it's going to be different this time?
I don't think it's going to be different at all, because at the end of the day, Budapest has been blaming the Commission for mistreating them, and the Commission has been saying that Budapest is not following democracy, basic democracy rules, and that is not going to stop. There's a very interesting line in the Hungarian program for the presidency that says that, and I'm going to quote it because I think it's very interesting, the current EU toolbox does not allow for monitoring whether the rule of law is respected within the institution system of the EU. The Hungarian presidency aims to examine how they can, they say, fill these gaps through the development of mechanisms. So it looks a bit like a tit-for-tat approach where they're going to ask the EU and the institutions to actually go through the same process as they did, where they had to justify, no, look at all the amazing things that we're doing and how democratic we are in our country so that they can get access to funds and stop being blamed for being the black duck.
Right, that's quite provocative.
It is.
Thank you, Aurelie.
Thank you, Giada.
I'm Giada Santana, and this was Euractivist Today in the EU podcast. Visit Euractiv to stay on top of the latest news, sign up for our podcast newsletter, and if you haven't subscribed yet, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever it is that you get your podcasts. Leave us a star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite streaming platform. It will really help us spread the word about our work. This episode was produced by Miriam Sanz de Tejada, Nicoletta Yonta, and me. Additional reporting by Nathan Kenes and Paul Mesed. As part of our commitment to accuracy, inclusion, and transparency, Euractiv is part of the Trust Project.